Side Oysters is a sustainable oyster farm located in the waters off Grand Isle. Oyster farmer Nathan Herring grows oysters in the floating cages that produce small, perfectly shaped oysters without having to dredge the bottom. He is assisted by Philip Pedescalzo.
Traditional oyster harvesting, you're constantly dragging that big heavy rake along the bottom, disturbing whatever's there in order to harvest the oysters. For what I'm doing, we don't ever have to do that. You know, we put 2 anchors in the ground, a rope between the anchors, and then you can tie off floating cages to the rope. So when you go harvest, you just pull oysters out of the cages that you need. Having them up off the bottom lets them grow really nicely. They get more algae in the top couple inches of the water, more oxygen. And that's, kind of part of why they grow a little bit faster here than they do in other areas, because we have them floating. We are so close to the Gulf here that we get pretty salty water pretty regularly. So I think generally the oysters that we grow here are a little bit saltier than in other areas of the state. The oysters here have sort of a creamy chicken soup flavor. But sometimes, they'll be a little bit sweeter throughout the year. And some of that is just, the oyster is preparing for different seasons.
The majority of Louisiana Gulf Coast oysters are still harvested with a dredge, but off-bottom oysters are an opportunity to increase production in areas impacted by rising sea levels and coastal erosion. Oyster farmer Jules Malauson, who passed away in 2023, was a pioneer in the off-bottom oyster industry. The 4th-generation oysterman turned from traditional dredging to cage farming in response to changing environmental factors. He was the first Louisiana native to receive an alternative oyster culture license, and his Grand Isle oyster farm became a top supplier to New Orleans restaurants.
As far as the oyster harvest area, this is area 13. And that's a big area that produces really nice oysters. I think the reason that you don't see a lot of area 13 oysters is because there's not a lot of oyster reefs here anymore. There's just not a lot of things for the oysters to attach to here. There's all kinds of reasons why there's not as many oysters here, but we grow them in a different way.
With a degree in wildlife and fisheries and a focus in aquaculture, in 2018, Nathan applied for an AOC lease spot at the newly developed Aquaculture Park in Grand Isle. While waiting for permits, he worked alongside established oyster farmers to learn the ropes. The oyster harvest is a hands-on endeavor. Oysters are selected by size. Ones that are too small are returned to the floating enclosures, where they grow quickly and are protected from predators.
I'm out here every week sorting. I'm not going through all of the oysters that are on the farm every week, but I'm out here constantly picking out the ones that are market size, putting those aside, putting back the ones that are too small. So we're sorting these oysters mostly for size, but also, the more you handle them, the better the oyster is going to look. We're out here trying to work the oysters, make them as pretty as possible. And part of the way that we do that is to break off the edges of the shell. And we're doing that so that hopefully it grows back stronger, but also in a nice cupped shape, so that when you shuck the oyster, there's a little, bowl kind of a thing for the oyster to sit in. It holds the juice that the oyster has in the shell.
Since starting his farm, the area has been hit by several major storms, including Zeta in 2020 and Ida, a Cat 5 hurricane that cut a path of destruction less than a year later. During both those disasters, Nathan lost equipment and oysters.
Probably 3 pretty bad hurricanes since I started, and each one of those probably took at least half of the crop that I had in the water. I lost my boat during Ida. It was actually in a storage unit that was right over there, and the whole storage unit was pretty much gone. The boat got swept out and never seen again. So there's a good bit of risk, and I think the reward is worth it.
The waters around Brightside are beginning to fill with other farms. Nearly all the new operations are owned by young entrepreneurs. There is a spirit of cooperation among the oyster growers.
When I got here, I started helping other farmers after storms, and eventually one of them let me use part of his plot to get started in exchange for me, helping him when I could. I think more leases potentially is more competition. It's good for the water, it's good for Louisiana.
Louisiana Coastal Cooking, Saturdays at 9 a.m. and Sundays at 11 a.m. on WYES New Orleans. Check local listings for your public TV station. Learn more at WYES.org.